People love Mega Man 2, and I mean, I get it. I just don't agree. This game was made in like 4 months, and you can tell by how a lot of the ideas here are approaching being fleshed out, but just don't quite get there. The weapon balance in Mega Man 2 is the worst in the series. If you're familiar with this game, then you probably already know what I'm talking about, but let me backtrack for anyone not aware of the structure of Mega Man games. Now, give or take an introduction stage, the player is given a selection of 8 levels that they can tackle in any order. Each level has a boss at the end, and defeating the boss lets you steal their weapon. Every weapon runs off of its own energy meter, some consume more than others, and each one is more effective against some enemies and, most importantly, bosses. Got it? Good. Metal Blade. This is the elephant in the room. Okay, so your standard energy-free Mega Buster can shoot 3 shots at a time in a straight line at a specific height for Mega Man's raised arm. Metal Blade can be launched in 8 directions, passes through walls, and consumes only 1 bar of energy for every 4 uses. Actually, and I only found this out while researching for this video, there's an exploit where the game stores the number of blades you've thrown until you switch to a different weapon, which means you can use 3 blades, switch to another weapon, immediately switch back, shoot 3 more blades, and repeat forever without using any energy. If you break down the numbers against most enemies, the Metal Blade only does as much damage as the Mega Buster, but did you notice? No, because it's basically an all-around better version of the Mega Buster. It suffers from the same kind of over-centralizing power that the whip does in Super Castlevania 4, where there isn't much incentive to use the other items or weapons over it because it covers so many options. Why do you need the axe as much if you can just whip diagonally? Why would you use Bubble Lead if you can just use Metal Blade? But now I'm getting ahead of myself. To truly get a grasp on how good Metal Blade is, we need to look at it in context. Bubble Lead is a good idea done poorly. It launches these bubbles along the ground that fall with gravity. The wiki says that they have high attack power, but the enemies don't feel designed around it. There are only 2 enemies who are weak to it. One of them is this spring guy who moves around on the ground. Okay, that makes sense. The other is this guy from Heatman Stage, who is always floating in the air on a cloud and throwing projectiles at you from above. Take this guy. You see him in Flashman Stage, and the first time you encounter him, he's below you and in front, so if you have the Bubble Lead already, you might put 2 and 2 together and try to kill him with it. How many shots does it take to kill him with Bubble Lead? Oh, cool. What about Metal Blade? Uh-huh. Atomic Fire is a boring weapon that would eventually just become part of the Mega Buster. It does a lot of damage when fully charged, but it's too slow and consumes too much energy to compete with the Metal Blade. Also, it induces seizures. Quick Boomerang is probably the second best weapon in the game. It's fast, energy efficient, and does enough damage to rival the Metal Blade. But I don't have a lot of footage of me using it because, well, you know. I feel bad for Air Shooter because it's a genuinely cool weapon with a unique behavior and decent damage. It just can't escape Metal Blade's shadow. If there's an enemy above you, you could use Air Shooter to take them out. Oh. Crash Bomber has some neat applications outside of combat, using it to destroy these walls, although regular stages don't use this much. It also has the potential to do big damage, but it's just too slow and expensive. To compensate for this, a surprising amount of enemies are weak to it, but I still tend to forget I have it until I have to do the... Oh. We'll get to you. Leaf Shield. The bottom of the barrel. The worst shield in the series. It doesn't get less useful than this. Here's how it works. You hit the fire button and these spinning leaves appear. Then, if you hit any direction, you launch the leaves in that direction. Only 4 of them though. What? 8 directions? That would be insane. Absurd. When you activate Leaf Shield, you cannot move. You can jump, but that's it. You also can't bring up another one until the one in flight disappears. Like Crash Bomber, a lot of enemies actually have a weakness to it, but why even bother when, in the time it takes to land 3 attacks with this thing, you could have launched 3 times as many metal blades. There's no reason to use this thing outside of the airman fight. Oh, but it's a shield, you say. Why don't you just use it to block attacks? Time Stopper is fine. It isn't even really a weapon, it just stops time. The one major flaw with it is that you can't deactivate it once you use it. You need to burn through all of the energy before time resumes. This is a problem for one particular section of this game that is particularly infamous. We'll get to that when we talk about stages, which is right now. I want to open this with a short explanation coming from Akira Kitamura, one of the co-creators of Megaman and lead designer on this game, from a 2011 interview with Hitoshi Ariga, who wrote some awesome Megaman manga. I created some rules for myself about enemy placement and design. Number 1. Single, weak little enemies would appear in waves of 3 or 4 individuals, and to the extent possible, I'd avoid mixing up multiple enemies. Number 2, they would all use the same attacks. Number 3, I would use differences in terrain and enemy placement to adjust the difficulty of a given section. Number 4, the difficulty of each enemy in the wave would gradually rise, but the last enemy to appear would be easier. The first enemy you might just have to jump and shoot. The next one you have to actually dodge his bullets, and it's a little more difficult. Then, for the final enemy in the wave, it would be easier. You can just stand there and shoot him head on. All the enemy waves in Mega Man follow that basic pattern. Actually, in the first Mega Man, I applied this midway through development, but for Mega Man 2, I did it for the entire game. Making the last enemy encounter in the wave easier was a key idea. It leaves the player with a softer impression of the game's difficulty. What Kitamura is describing here is a technique called Kisho Tenketsu. It comes from Japanese 4-panel manga, which, as you might suspect, are comic strips told in 4 panels. Writers are able to make stories with this limitation through a tried and true method, much like the design mentioned here. The first element is introduced in a safe environment for the player to get comfortable with. Next, that element is developed, or in this case, made more difficult. Third, there's a twist, some kind of spin on the idea to throw the player for a loop. This should be the most difficult part. The last scenario should be about as hard as the first, making a rise and fall of challenge. When you put it all together, you get Ki, Sho, Ten, Ketsu. This allows the player to digest an idea before making it more complex, and finishing off easy so that they don't feel exhausted. Once you understand this structure, you'll see it all the time, especially in Japanese games, heck, Asian storytelling in general. When Kitamura says that he used this framework during Mega Man 2, he wasn't lying. There is a good amount of 4-panel design in this game, but sometimes it breaks from that formula, or executes it oddly. Let's look at a few stages to see what I mean. Megaman Stage is probably the best in the game, ironically. It centers around these conveyor belts that move in different directions, with good examples of key and show throughout. Mixing the belts with the Piero bots and the elevation changes in a way that feels like a natural progression. There's actually very little combat in this level. The whole first screen consists of the conveyor belts and the falling drill hazards, and there's only 4 enemy types total, if you count the drills. There is an attempt to give every level something unique, except for Woodman, and this is probably the best example. I'm also not against Bubbleman Stage, besides the anyway. The water physics in Mega Man games work differently from mostly in that they don't make you tear your hair out. The water levels tend to be spike heavy, but I don't think it's too bad here. There's a good example of how not to introduce a gameplay element. The first time you see these blocks is above an instant death pit, giving you no time to get used to the quick jumps you need to do to avoid losing a life on the first screen. They also never appear again in the level. They're just there, at the start. I might have put them at the end, at least, with these crabs that fall from the sky, although there's a problem with that too, because the crabs make their first appearance here, right before the boss room. They also just show up, and then they're gone. I don't even think they come back in the Wily levels. This is another reoccurring theme of Mega Man 2. Right before the end of a level, something random gets thrown at you for the first time. A good example is Heatman Stage. You spend the whole level getting used to these flyboys, tellies, and the disappearing blocks, mostly those last two. There's some pretty textbook design, introducing the blocks in a safe area, then introducing the tellies who track you across the screen, then you're doing it over lava. I do loathe this section, to be clear. It's not badly designed, it's just a pain. I spent about 10 minutes and 40 seconds total just playing this one block puzzle, not counting the time it took between deaths and game overs to get back here. So you do all that, you're feeling good, finally, you've conquered the block puzzle, you jump down the ladder, and who are you? A random sniper armor in a room that's way too cramped for how much distance he travels. Imagine coming here with a Mega Buster. On hard mode, the original Japanese difficulty, he has 20 health. You would have to hit him 20 times with the Mega Buster to kill him. This enemy comes out of nowhere in a situation that makes it basically impossible to avoid getting hit if you're Buster only, and then he's gone. That's probably the most egregious example in the game. Woodman is fine. This part with the peepees is kind of mishandled. It suddenly throws this complex enemy at you when you've just met the Monk Kings. There's other things I could nitpick, but the only other problem is how claustrophobic the Friender mini-boss gets by the third one. Kitamura even admits that he regrets designing this specific section this way. Not a lot to say about Airman Stage, just a pretty solid, tough level. I like how the Matasaburos interact with the player in a more unique way. Because they're more of a supportive enemy, they can be used for some really dynamic combinations. I have to give props to Flashman Stage. The ice physics don't ruin it. The multiple branching pathways open up replay value and reward the player for using the items without making them necessary to progress. I guess I should elaborate on what I said about the time stopper. So, this level's gimmick is these instant death beams. It's a vertical stage, most of which you're falling for, and the timing on these beams is strict. You need to know exactly which direction to hug for every screen, or they'll get you. Trial and error gameplay like this is something I've seen people tolerate, but that's up to you. What's a problem is that the developers are baiting you into screwing yourself over if you want to play the game in a fun way. What do I mean? Well, you might have fought Flashman before this and gotten the time stopper. If you're resourceful, you might also look at your weapons and realize that you can use the time stop to subvert the beams entirely. Now, whether or not totally nullifying a stage mechanic is good or bad design is also up to you, but you have to admit that it's a neat reward for resourceful players. Except, here's the problem, Quickman is weak to the time stopper, and once you activate it, you can't turn it off until it runs out of energy. Sure, there's some weapon energy pickups here and there, but that just extends the duration until it inevitably runs out. You can't even change to another weapon. So this admittedly cool and well-designed section with the room darkening, just damage boost through it, I guess. If you use it in the stage, there's no way to refill it for the boss fight after it's gone, besides getting a game over, which isn't actually a solution. Oh, sorry. He's also weak to Crash Bomber. Good luck with that. I understand the idea here, it's just poorly thought out. The designers wanted to give hints as to what boss was weak to what weapons, so they put enemies in their stages who were also weak to that weapon. Even though Metal Blade means that you'll probably never notice it, the idea is good on its face. It's only when it's applied in this specific stage, with this specific weapon, that it goes from subtle to obnoxious. You just have to tough it out and learn the beam pattern, because otherwise you're punished for using your weapons in creative ways. This is the worst stage in the game. You notice after this game that the classic series titles dropped stages that were mostly vertical because Megaman's physics and the hard fixed angle of the Mega Buster make them uncomfortable, to say the least. First off, this pipe, right above the ladder, sends a telly straight down at you where you can't hit it unless you drop off the ladder to shoot. It's awkward and not that fun. The Met placement here is a little obnoxious, but it's not terrible. The rail platform section is a good representation of the way that this game does a lot of things in 3s instead of 4s, which is probably why a lot of the ideas don't feel fully realized. Speaking of half-done ideas, here's a blocky. That's the only one. It never shows up again in this stage. This Met is placed here just to piss you off. That's why they put platforms on the screen below, because they knew you would fall. The only way to make him vulnerable is to jump onto the middle platform, where he'll immediately shoot 3 pellets at you. Ugh. Hop up the ladder and... Oh, I'm sorry. Have we seen the birds before? No, but if this is your first stage, you have to adapt to it, while on a ladder and with nothing but the Mega Buster. If you want to avoid the little birds, you have to do this. If you haven't gone to Wood or Airman stages yet, you haven't seen the birds before, and you certainly haven't dealt with them on a ladder. If you were unfortunate enough to pick the left path, you have to deal with the ladders, birds, and the crazy cannon. Good luck without Metal Blade. Here's an E-Tank. Oh, you don't have item 1? Gotta go all the way back down. Okay, almost done with the stages. Not a lot to say about this one except that it's not great. Requiring items with limited energy to advance is annoying, especially when none of the previous levels required you to use them. I understand that they can't do that, because they can't guarantee that the player will have them, but then that creates a problem later on when you make it impossible to progress unless you use item 1 in this specific way that feels like advanced tech because it's more than you've been asked to do for the entire game. And if you run out of energy, you have to farm. Not cool. The rest of the Wily stages are actually pretty good. The bits that require the items are more obvious, and there isn't anything major to complain about besides Wily 3's disgusting color palette. I actually really like Wily 4's false floor traps. They have a good introduction, and figuring out that you can Simon's Quest these sections with the bubble lead is cool and rewarding. I wish there was more stuff like this in the game. The whole Mega Man franchise, especially the classic series, suffers from this feast or famine problem with the bosses. Either you have a fairly challenging fight with the Buster, or you have their weakness weapon and it becomes a cakewalk. There's exceptions to this rule, but for the most part the bosses are pretty painless. Airman and Quickman have some annoying random elements in their pattern, namely Airman's tornadoes, because yes, the formation is random. At least it inspired a great cover. The Wily Stage bosses are also cool, using some pretty innovative techniques for the time. The Mega Dragon and Gutsdozer are actually animated backgrounds with hitboxes attached to them. They suffer from Sprite Flicker and slowdown though, which sucks, but iconic fights nonetheless. So, why did I have a whole section for boss? This is the worst boss in the game, hands down. It's probably the worst boss in the series. Okay, maybe not the worst, but this thing sucks.
And this is what the flash bomb does.
Let's break this down. The Boo Beam Trap is the boss of the 4th Wily Stage. It's these 5 turrets placed around the room, all of which need to be destroyed, and can only be destroyed with the Crash Bomber. Let's do some math. The Crash Bomber, with full energy, can be used 7 times. That's 5 for the turrets, okay, but there's 2 that are inaccessible until you destroy these breakable walls. So, this means you need all 7 shots of the Crash Bomber when you enter the room, and if you miss a single shot, you have to game over and restart the level with full energy. There is no other way to replenish it, and you need all of it. You might be saying, that doesn't seem so bad. How hard can it be? Remember what I said a second ago about Sprite Flicker? This boss in particular suffers hard from the NES's sprite limit. If you aren't aware, the NES was only able to render 8 sprites per scan line. Any more than that, and only the priority sprites are shown. The rest are invisible. For most of the game, this isn't a big issue, but let's count how many sprites we have here. Note that Megaman is actually 2 sprites himself. So, 5 turrets, 5 walls, 5 projectiles from the turrets, 2 Megaman sprites, add on the Crash Bomber and its explosion, and you're working with up to 19 sprites at any given moment, with animations. You also need to use item 1 to conserve weapon energy, so it's just a nightmare. I don't hate this game. I don't hate any Mega Man games, actually. I love Mega Man, and I respect the hell out of 2 for being a foundation for the entire series. I just want to be honest and give an organized argument against the mainstream narrative that it's the peak of the series, even the classic series. You can tell it has problems because some of the things I've pointed out here are things that they stopped doing. The further you go into just the NES titles, you see ideas being better developed, more balanced weapons, and backgrounds that don't make my eyes bleed.